What's up? Hi, I'm Amanda Pollock. I am a cookbook and food memoir coach. And the question today, cheers, is do you need a book coach who's a published author? Now, I have gotten not necessarily this question before, but I've had people just a little bit better. But basically, I find it interesting because, but it's happened with like a lot of men. I don't know what that is. But yeah, they like want to know. They're like, oh, have you written a cookbook? Have you written a food memoir? I'm like, get out of my face, bruh. Why I think this is interesting though, is because if you think about like sports, there are so many people who are amazing athletes. They would be terrible coaches. You wouldn't want to learn from them at all. And I think it's the same with book coaching. So one of the reasons, honestly, why I didn't even want to be a cookbook, specifically a cookbook coach, I haven't written a cookbook. And a lot of cookbook coaches out there are people who are like culinary helpers, assistants, I don't really know what you would say, but a lot of them have written cookbooks. That's kind of their whole marketing tool, which I think is great. And most of them are lovely, lovely people. So I'm not saying anything about them. It's just how they're positioned. And so I didn't want to do that because I hadn't written a cookbook. In fact, I have a post on my site called How I Became a Food Writer and Producer Without Knowing How to Chop an Onion. You can find that below. I'll link it. So I don't know, I have a very different approach. I honestly feel like what makes me a good coach for people who are writing cookbooks is that I am a food writer, I am an editor, but also I'm a little bit on the outside of it. So I'm not in the thick of it. I feel like that's an advantage for a lot of people because I'm not so precious about some things, but I also have a really good pulse on what is actually happening. And that feels very like bold to say. But I'm gonna pour myself a little bit more wine just because the glass got a little bit empty. And if you're not cool with me drinking wine, then I don't know, it's whatever non-alcoholic thing you want me to be drinking right now. That's fine. I ain't offended. But also, it's like, it's summer. My friend got me these like super cute glasses on Etsy. It just feels like wrong. The sun's out, you know, I had to be inside. I'm doing this because I want to tell you this. It was very important for me. Cocktails with a cookbook coach. But all of that to say, I understand why people have that question. Because if you're going to pay someone to perform a service, you want to know that they have experience in that. You want to know that they would understand the needs that you have, understand the industry, all of that. And I totally get that. But my only point with this is that just because you have written a book doesn't mean that you're qualified to help somebody else write a book. Just because you're a New York Times bestseller, and don't even get me started on that, that is another video for another time. Just because you're a New York Times bestseller doesn't actually mean you're a bestseller. It doesn't actually mean people like your book. It really just means that there's stuff with algorithms. There's like stuff with, you know, preferences for certain things and only certain books being calculated. Anyway, not to say like if you're a New York Times bestseller and you get that, that's amazing. That's such an accomplishment. But it also doesn't necessarily mean that other people who aren't New York Times bestsellers, that their books suck. But anyway, what I'm saying is that I understand the need or the initial desire to have somebody who has written cookbooks, who has that name attached to them. All I'm saying is that in general, if you're looking for a cookbook coach, there are certain things you want to look for. And you want someone, one, who gets you and your project. Like, there is no point in you working with someone who has credentials, who other people are like, oh my gosh, they're the best, if you don't want to work with them. And you can tell, a lot of people will have, like, a lot of coaches will have like an initial 30-minute call. And so this is where you can see if you vibe. A lot of times they'll want you to send in pages. That's something I do, so I can at least see like, okay, like, do I feel like this would be a project that I could add value to? A good cookbook coach / just book coach in general is going to tell you if you aren't a good fit. Someone who will just take any and everybody, that's a problem. And there are people who are going to say like, hey, I'm better with people who are, you know, beginners. I'm better with people who are established, who are looking for this. People are pretty open. I work with a lot of people who are working on their first books. So they have experience doing either like food blogging, or they have some press credentials. They have, normally it's like micro influencers, and then so it's really helping them cultivate that idea and then being alongside the journey for the long haul. But everyone has their own thing, and that's not to say that like if somebody came along, they're like, I'm writing my second cookbook or food memoir, I'm like, no. But so you want someone who is working in your field, who you like to work with, but also too, I would look at like what people have said about working with them. Like, do they like working with them? But I also think too, and you can find that on like, you know, sometimes people will put like on their website like client love, or mine's listed as word on the street. You can also find their past work and see if like even if they are a writer or have been an editor, if you even like their style. Another thing you can do too is like look them up for podcasts. You can just put somebody's name in there and look up podcasts or whatever interviews, and a lot of times they'll come up, or they'll have a media page on their website. And like I have that for interviews that I've done, so you can also kind of see like, oh, and I mean YouTube. But you can see if like you feel like, oh, they have valuable information. I feel like they could really help and serve my project. But also, sometimes you might start working with someone and then it's not a good fit, and so you just kind of also want to know like what it would be if you start working with them and then it turns into something that you're like, maybe not. But going back to my question, or the original question of, you know, should you like work with a cookbook coach who isn't a published author? Yeah. If you feel like they get you and you feel like they're going to put in the work to do everything they can to get you the best, your story in the best possible shape, absolutely. Quick disclaimer, I would just steer clear of people who are gonna tell you, also it got like really dark all of a sudden. I don't know if it was because I said like, oh my gosh, it's sunny and I have to have this thing in this cup, but anyway, just want to say that because I was like, whoa, those are some clouds. Um, summer in Nashville. But anyone who's promising you that in however long that they're gonna get you a deal with an agent, or they're telling you that there's going to be a very specific result, most likely with like representation or publication, I would steer clear of them. You can look for people who say, you know, I can't promise this, but this is what I've been able to do for past clients. That is kind of a nice thing. But again, other clients, sometimes I wouldn't really measure yourself up against them because your journey is going to be different. You don't know, like the other client could have had a connection with something and then that's why they got their book deal or whatever it is. So all of this to say, work with people who you vibe with. I wouldn't take a book being published by your book coach as being the be all end all, because also I will say that I know a lot of book coaches who are published and they absolutely can use their network to kind of help get your story in front of certain eyes. But also coaches who aren't published may still have like fantastic networks and also may work harder for you than a book coach who is established. It's really your call, but I would just say all in all, like, it doesn't really matter if they've been published or not. It only matters if they can get you closer to the story you want to tell. And that's the only thing that a good coach is going to do, because you're going to have it's developmental editing, it's project management, and it's coaching, like emotional coaching. So if you feel like someone, you're like kind of on the fence, you're like, I don't know, like they don't have enough, I feel like they don't have enough like kudos or whatever, like, you know, there's this other person who's like really impressive, but you don't connect with the person who's super impressive, maybe give the other one a chance. That is totally your decision, but no, I don't think that you have to hire a book coach who has published a book. Also, another thing, you can find a link below too, where I talk about Judith Jones, who is the editor for Julia Child and a bunch of other people. And she was a fiction editor, not a writer, and was not a cookbook editor, but loved mastering the art of French cooking. And so then she really spearheaded that. She really kind of became like the editor for cookbooks. It's ridiculous. So, you know, just keep that in your back pocket, but I'll link it below. But yeah, would love to know your thoughts, like what you think a book coach should be, what you look for. If you want to connect, I have a link below too. You can find my site. And yeah, anyway,